In this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of how to set up your world machine file, or you can use any terrain generation program. The file sizes you need to be considerate of when exporting out your data, as well as how to set up some of the masks that you can use to pre-paint your different layers on your terrain in Unreal Engine. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to preface is that this video isn't sponsored at all by World Machine. I personally use World Machine in my workflow. I like it. I think it does great results. However, I'm going to try to cover the principles that apply to programs that allow you to generate terrain based off of height data or to create that height data, as well as creating some masks. So even though that we're using World Machine, hopefully these principles will apply to other programs. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in and I'll show you what we're going to do in our setup for World Machine. So here I have just what is relatively basic. So if you aren't familiar with World Machine, it is a node-based workflow. What that means is that you can create generators, selection masks, all different kinds of things, and you work with them in a node-based workflow. So for example, what's coming out of here is a height field. So if I click this is the noise that generates. We do some crushing of the levels, so you can see input, output. We then do some erosion. So there's our input based off of that curves and some erosion. So that's literally about it. So this is what we've generated with our terrain. It's very basic. You can go crazy with that. But I do want to make sure you understand that this isn't about using World Machine. It's really about the information we get out of it. So let's cover that. So a couple things that I want to cover first is how you generate your height map and then how you generate masks, which you'll see later when we set up in Unreal. So with this, I've just got a basic height output. Now, if I double click this, take note of these settings. So when you create your height map, you want to make sure that you're using a raw 16 file, and that's it. Now I've set this to go ahead and output to a specific directory every single time, and that's fine. I can write the output when I build it, it will output. All you need to know is make sure you output a raw 16 file for your height map. Okay. That's the first thing. Now I'm going to jump down here. I'm going to skip this. This is simply just colorizing for what essentially is a splat map. Now, there have been questions about, okay, I want to generate a splat map. What is a splat map? A splat map is basically just taking bits of information. So for example, like a flow, which we'll have right here, or maybe like a dirt pass, or maybe cliffs, and you put those into respective R, G, and B channels. So that's really all a splat map is. Now, you can use this in your material setups. I would caution doing that simply because in order for you to get the detail that you want, so for example, if let's say we've got this flow, we want that to be, like a dirt eroding from a mountain. If you try to use a splat map inside Unreal, you're going to have a very, very large texture to make this all work. So say, for example, it could be a 4K or an 8K. That gets very expensive very, very quickly. The second option we have, which is what I'm going to show you here, is that we can still generate those maps, effectively think of them as masks. We can generate those out of World Machine and still use that information when we go to paint the different materials on our terrain material. So that's the process we're going to do here. So I'm going to skip over this splat map. Don't even worry about that. But what I want to do is I still want to generate some of those masks. So I'll go ahead and click through these so you can see. This is cliffs. We've got plains. We've got dirt, we have a waterbed, and we have a flow map. Okay, now the key parts, because I know this question's come up quite a bit in chat, is that how do you get these? It's very simple. Like I said, if you remember that World Machine is a node-based structure, this is what I've done. So if you see this checkpoint, it's simply taking this height output, and what I've done is I've run just certain different selections. Think about it like creating just different masks in Photoshop or whatever. That's all we're doing. So after this height field, I've simply done this, and I'll double click it here. I want to select any slope on my height map that is at a maximum of 90 degrees and a minimum of 45. So anything in between here and a little bit of fall off, that will be my selection. So that's what we can see here. So the white areas denote where we have those steep cliff faces. So we'll continue down here. I've got a height selection. So anything that falls below 1,300 meters, but is still above 60 meters, that's going to be my plain. So you could effectively think of that as any area below like high mountain peaks. That's it. Mask input here for this one on dirt, and we're simply doing selection. So anything that's less than 2 degrees, but more than 0 degrees is our dirt. So that's the flat areas. That's it. You can choose to do whatever different kinds of mask that you want. The key thing to remember is that these are going to associate with layers inside of our terrain material. So for example, if you create 20 different maps and you don't have 20 different layers, it's kind of useless. So try to associate them with the different materials that you will apply to your terrain. Okay, so now that that's done, that's said, so all we need to do is just build this. So I can go ahead and build now, it will run through, it will generate everything. Okay, now one thing I do want to make note of here is, and this is very important, Unreal uses a very specific set of pixel densities, if you will, for your terrain at a specific resolution. So I've gone and built this. This is all outputted. You can see what the terrain should look like in Unreal, but I'm going to go up to World Commands, go to Project World Parameters. And this is what I want to show you. So I know that there's other programs out there that do this, but World Machine by default can cycle between various different resolutions. Now, if you're using a free version of World Machine, you're going to be capped at 513 by 513. So I've generated this terrain at 2049 by 2049. Here's the thing, and keep in mind, and I'll show this here a little bit later in this video, but this resolution, while technically you can use it inside Unreal, it's going to present a problem. It's going to create a border around your landscape because Unreal doesn't use 2049 by 2049, or if I uncheck +1, 2048 by 2048, right? You would think that these would be the common values, right? Powers of 2. That is not the case. So what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm going to actually pull up the landscape web page that's from the Unreal documentation to show you what we need to take note of. Now again, understand this, that if you're using a program that doesn't allow you to necessarily specify the custom output, and so you are stuck with, you know, a 512 by 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, whatever it is, we can still work around that. But if you have the option to change this in your software, let's go ahead and change it. So here I'm going to take a look. These are the overall resolutions, 129 by 8,129, 4,033 by 4,033. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. You can read through this and figure out, okay, what size do you need? Obviously, if you want a larger landscape, smaller landscape, there's a whole bunch of math in that. In fact, that's actually in the Terrain Masterclass, shameless plug, sorry, that I cover this a little bit more extensively. But the point is that once you've determined your overall resolution, that's what's important. So in this case, we're really close to this 2017 by 2017. So that's what I'm going to use. Those are going to be my values. So jump back to World Machine, and I'm going to go back to my Project World Parameters. I'm going to uncheck the +1 and click the Custom. So this is where I'm going to go in and type in our 2017. Go ahead and press Tab, and there we go. Press OK. It'll tell me to rebuild. Let's go ahead and rebuild everything, and that's it. That is ideally what you want to do. So we're outputting our height map and all of our masks, and we'll go, actually, let me pull up that directory so you guys can see. So this is what our output is now. So we've got our splat maps, which is that bitmap, our outputs, which are .raw, and then our height map, our output.r16. In fact, let me jump real quick and show you here. So on one of these outputs, make sure they're set to low precision 8-bit raw. That's what you need for those. So R16, let me double check. Height map is raw 16, and our masks, so our selection masks, are raw 8-bit. And that's it. So that, now we have all our information. So let's go ahead and jump over into Unreal and show you how we actually integrate this into our scene. All right, so now we're back in Unreal, and for this demo, I just preset up a scene. There is nothing really crazy going on here. I have a sky, I've got a directional light, and a skylight. This will just help us to better visualize when we import the terrain, and that's it. You'll see later too, I set up a simple material, again, outside of the scope of what we're gonna do here, just so we can visualize and see in very clear colors what's happening. So, all right, so we've exported all of our information from World Machine, and now we need to get it into the engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go up to my modes panel and click on the landscape tab. In doing this, it should open up here in a second, and this allows us to create our new landscape. And again, ignore this because you won't have any layers by default, but again, I've already preset this up. It's a basic material just to simply visualize what's happening, so don't worry about that. So instead of doing create new, I'm going to do import from file. And this is where we're going to import our height map. So this is our output, and this is what we're looking for. So I'm going to go to where we outputted our 2017 by 2017 maps, and I'm going to click this output.r16 and click open. Okay, I'm going to zoom back here a little bit so we can see what's happening. So the grain is a representation of what this could be. Now, the beautiful part about this is Unreal is going to auto-recognize the data coming in, which you can see here, height map resolution is 2017 by 2017. The overall resolution, 2017 by 2017. Okay, now if you remember a little bit earlier, I mentioned that, you may not be able to specify the output size of your terrain. That is okay, we can still get around this. The important thing to note here, though, is when you import this data, when you use this import from file, you need to take note of your overall resolution. That's the important part, so we'll come back to that. All right, so there's one other thing that we need to do when it comes to importing the height map from Unreal. Now, this is in the documentation, but basically the way I understand this is that when we're generating our height map inside of World Machine, it's going to take its values from, I think, 0 to like 1024. That is the range of that. When we import it into Unreal, it can take values from 0 to, well, technically 0 to negative 1024 and 0 to 1024. So effectively 2048. So World Machine is 1024, Unreal is 2048 as far as the height map goes. So technically we have double the height map information when we bring it into Unreal. So really my rambling aside, all that means is that basically when you import your terrain from World Machine, make sure you go down to your scale and do 100, 100, and 50. And you'll notice what happens when I tab, that it shortens it. That will get you the correct sizing. So our terrain in Unreal will match visually how it is in World Machine. If you use 100 by 100 by 100, you import and you're like, I forgot to do that. That's fine, you can change it later. That's not a problem. It's just easier to do this. Just understand that your height, your Z, is going to be half of what it should be. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do import. We'll give it a second to think, and there we go. So that is our terrain. So I think this is probably self-evident, which is, you probably already know this by now, that this is why we would use an external program to create terrain, because to try to do this all by hand would just, it'd be near impossible to do. So, okay, so now that we've got our terrain, the other thing that we want to do is we want to use some of our masks. Now, if you recall that I went back and I had mentioned about this whole idea that you may not be able to import your terrain at those predetermined Unreal sizes, right? Like the 2017 by 2017, 4033 by 4033, etc. All those weird values. If you don't have those values set up in your terrain, you're going to notice that there is a border around it. It'll actually just look like kind of stretched pixels. That's okay, we can work around that, and I'll show you how here in just a second. But what we want to do now is we actually want to come in and associate all that information. So I'm going to go back to my landscape tab. I'm going to go to the paint one, and here you can see those materials that were already set up. Okay, now I'm not actually going to do any hand painting. That's not what's covered in this video, but I do want to show you how we can associate and basically do a pre-paint pass on the terrain using those masks that we exported. So to do this, now again, because I've set up this material, I've also set up our landscape layer info nodes. Now, if you're starting from scratch, you create your material and you're like, hey, I'm clicking this and I'm painting, but it doesn't do anything. Why? It's because there's no layer info node associated. So to do that, you can just simply click this, create layer info node, and create one of these layers. Typically, you'll use your weight blended layer. You can use non-weight blended, that's your fine, that's your choice if you want to do that. But typically the normal thing is using weight blended layers. I've already done that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into our green, set this up, click, and you'll notice that our terrain will turn green. And we'll go ahead and add one to our blue, and why not add one to our purple? Okay, so at this point, if you notice when I added those, nothing happened. And that's because those layer info nodes are blank. They are just simply created and they're now associated. So how do we get the information from those different masks, those different selections that we had onto our terrain? Here's how we do that. So I'm gonna leave our planes as default green. As I'm adding these layers, they're stacking on top of each other. So because these are weight blended, it means that any point, so say for example, I do my water layer first, and it paints it in, and then I do my cliffs. Any part where the cliffs overlap the water, it will override those. Now there's actually a cool feature we can do to reverse that, and I'll show you how, but let's just start with the basics. So in my water one, what I'm gonna do is just right click in this blank space. I'm gonna do import from file. So here I'm gonna go ahead and we'll navigate to the ones that we had, and I want to use, let's do flow for right now. So I'm gonna do flow, even though you'd normally use water, but just easier to see, for example. So I'll double click this, and we'll give it a second, and then you'll see it populate on our terrain. There we go. So beautiful. And I think this is pretty self-evident why, again, we would use an external program to create this, because that is quite a lot of information. Now, what's really cool here too is that as if you recall that I said that this is basically just pre-painted on there. So if I select my water layer, take my brush size down a little bit, I can still paint or remove information from that layer. It's non-destructive. Now, of course, I can go in here and be like, oh, I messed up, I didn't do this. All we can do is we can simply re-import and we'll override it. So there we go. Okay, now I'll cover this in a different video. This is really to cover more of 424 and earlier. There are some new terrain tools, so this is kind of what will eventually be an older method, but still applicable, but this is that process. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my cliffs, do the same thing. We'll import from file, and let's go ahead and do our cliffs output so we can see that. Give it a second. And there we go, so it's in. So I'll go to this little section over here where we have some water. So you can see, because I did the cliffs layer second, that it overrides that data. Now I can go back to my water and just simply click re-import and it will paint over top of it. So you can do that as much as you would like. It's like, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Re-import from cliffs, override that water. So that's a process that you can re-import and overwrite, which is great, but be aware, and this is part what I don't like about the tools, but just be aware of this, is that when you do that, of course, it's going to overwrite any of your paint data. Again, the new tools have some cool features with that, but we'll cover that in a totally separate video. Okay, so that is the process of doing this, and that pretty much wraps up this video. And I'm going to show you real quick one of the caveats if you don't have that terrain information, how to fix that. But that should get you through this whole process of getting your terrain imported, getting your different masks set up, and then being able to import those and use those for your terrain. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and walk through the process if you don't have the squared resolutions or those one-off resolutions from your terrain output and show you how to correct that. So in this section, I'm just going to quickly go over, if you have a terrain generation program that you can't specify a custom output size, how do you work around that? So I'm going to show you that process here real quick. So okay, so I'm going to jump back to World Machine, and if you recall, under our project settings, in here we've got the ability to set our custom. Now, let's say, for example, this was stuck at 2049 by 2049, which is part of the default width. So I'll uncheck custom. I'll actually go back here. So, say whatever it is that I'm stuck at a resolution. Okay, so that's what I've done is I've exported this with the I think what is 2017 by 2017 resolution. Yeah. Of what Unreal wants. So I've done an arbitrary one. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the exact same process we just went through. So I'll click my landscape tab. I'll click import from file, and we'll go ahead and specify. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my output here, which again, this is that one that's exported out at 2049 by 2049. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, it looks exactly the same. But if you recall in the previous one, I said make note of your overall resolution, which in this case is 2143 by 2143. So I went ahead and set my Z scale to 50, so we should be good. Let's go ahead and import it, and we'll take a look. Okay, so it looks relatively the same, but it's not, and I'll show you why. So if we look on the border here, you'll see that this is what I was talking about with that stretching. So we've got the material kind of stretching off into the distance. In fact, let me go to detail lighting so you can see a little bit better. And there you can see that stretching that occurs. Okay, so what's the problem then? Well, here's the problem. So let's go back to our paint, and we've got our layers here. I'll go ahead and reassociate this so we can see. So we'll do our planes, and then I'll do our water, because again, we're just going to show just this one process. Okay, so if I go to my water layer, and I do import from file, and I go ahead and select that basic one that we had. So this one, the flow output, we'll use so it's easy to see. Technically, its resolution is 2049 by 2049, the same as our height map. If I click open, you'll see this. Boom, layer does not match the current landscape extents. There's that 2143 by 2143. Okay, so how do we get around that? So I'll go ahead and click OK, and I'm going to jump over to Photoshop real fast and show you this file. So let me go up to, this is our flow map, image size, we're at 2049 by 2049. So the problem is the editor's telling us this needs to be bigger. Here's the problem though, you would think, oh, I'll just go up into my image size, change this from 2049 to 2143 by 2043, hit OK, and rescale it. That is incorrect, because if we do that, you'll notice that this still goes to the extent of our terrain, which if we jump back to Unreal, it doesn't actually extend. In fact, it's got a border, for lack of better terms. So okay, so we'll go ahead and go back to Photoshop, undo this. What you want to do is this: go up to your image, canvas size, and in your canvas size, this is where we want to change it to 2143 by 2143. Hit OK, and you'll notice it puts that border around it for us. That's all you need to do. Again, if you're exporting your terrain out at the right custom sizes, you don't have to do this. You can skip this. But in the event that you can't specify a custom size, this is what you do. So we would go ahead and save this out as our raw file, which I'll jump back to Unreal, jump into here, and then I'm going to go to our water layer, and I'm going to do import from file, and this time we're going to use our 2143 by 2143. Hit OK. No warning message. After a few seconds, it'll pop up, and we'll see that that information is pre-painted on the map. And of course, it stops at our extent. So there you go. So that is the process in which you can import and export your terrain from a program like World Machine or any terrain generation program. How you set it up, how you create your splat maps. Again, it's entirely up to you what you do with those splat maps or those masks. Just remember that those are going to be associated with your terrain layers. So a little bit of pre-planning, you'll be fine, and you can generate those. How you can right-click on that, import that, set it up, and that is it. So that should hopefully get you started with terrain in Unreal and get you set up on the basic process. And again, we'll cover more in depth on this stuff in future videos. That being said, I really appreciate all you guys' support. I know it's crazy times right now. So stay smart, stay sane. And again, thank you for all your support. I always hate the shameless plugs. You know, I never ask for subscribers, likes, dislikes. I mean, let me know what you guys think. Drop a comment. If you guys have ideas or suggestions for future videos, absolutely let me know. I'm here to provide resources for you guys, especially in these crazy times. So I'm going to do the best I can. You do the best you can. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.